This palette project is a single-page application, SPA. This SPA integrates HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with a Rails API backend. Upon sending the HTTP GET request for index.html from inside of my project's front-end directory, the event of loading and parsing the document calls a function which uses addition assignment to populate the main element on the doc with some elements. The HTML includes my why, some detailed guidance, click new, and a GIF that I made with Procreate on my iPad. To preserve the single-page nature of the app, clicking new calls a function that clears the main element by assigning the inner HTML to an empty string. The main is then populated with form elements including color and text inputs, save and reset buttons, and a blank div with the class square assignment and an empty list UL with a tones list ID. With CSS, elements with the square class are styled to have equal width and height, be centered on a page, and rotate 45 degrees. Box shadows are added to create an illusion of depth. Step 1. Clicking the background color input opens a color picker where the user may choose a color value. The event of having a color value calls an arrow function expression that dynamically changes the background style of the blank square palette. Having set the text input value equal to the color input value, the text field is populated with the color's hex value as the input value changes. Step 2. Having an input value on the tones color selector calls a function that creates an li element with class attributes, appends it to the tones list UL, and styles the background color to equal the tone input value. The tone input function is only called when the tones list has less than 9 children and the last li added does not have the same value. The reset button simply sets the tones list UL to an empty string and resets the counter that limits 9 children. Once save is clicked, the background color value and all tone li values are noted as key value pairs using object literal notation. Having set up active record associations in the Rails backend, a tone belongs to a palette has many tones, and accepts nested attributes for tones. Furthermore, the strong params within the palette's controller is expecting nested tones. Nesting the tones as objects with hex properties within the palette's as tones attributes array enables the palette to be posted with nested JSON. When sent as a post request with the config object outlining the method type and stringified data, the palette's controller will create a new palette, assigning it an ID. For each tone in the array, new tones are created with that ID being assigned to the tone attributes property, palette ID. I should note that the post requests or any other cross-server requests are only possible because of the RACcourse middleware. This allows the script to explicitly access the JSON being rendered from the Rails server. Additionally, the JSON being rendered passed through a serializer service class that cleans up the JSON. Simply put, to place some colors on the DOM, I do not need to know what time it was updated or created at. We don't need to flood the response with these values. After sending a post request, the JSON method is called on the HTTP response object, making the data consumable JSON. Passing the now consumable JSON as the argument for the class constructor method initializes a new palette object that has access to the class methods render palette and render tones. These class methods display the data very similarly to the form arrangements and styles. However, the box shadows on each tone li element are oriented in a way to give a slight wide angle perspective. I wanted the tones to have a settled or locked in feel. Think unlocking your phone icons and locking them minus the animation. After 3 seconds, the getPalettes function is called, which clears the main element and fetches the palette's index. To fetch the index, a config object is not required, as fetch sends a GET request by default. Slicing and reversing the pallet's response allows them to be iterated from back to front, rendering the last creation first. Originally, I wanted to arrange the pallet's index by simply repeating the post-creation view, but I couldn't help but try to implement some elements of isometric op art design. Each pallet tone Li is skewed 30 degrees. The illusion is created when three squares, now rhombi, join, converging their three axes in the same position. This creates a perspective for which the left, right, and top or bottom, depending on your fixation, are all visible. Each palette includes a link to each pallet's show page, having attached event listeners. Clicking the palette link calls a function to fetch that palette by its dataset ID. Similar to the creating process, an ES6 class object is initialized after formatting the server response. With access to class methods, the DOM is manipulated to display the palette and tones just as they were post-form.